Welcome everyone to Letting Go of the Good Food versus Bad Food Mentality. I am Lisa Dahl. I am an intuitive eating and body image health coach, and I work with women just like you to learn how to listen, trust, and respect their bodies so that they could be happy, healthy, and confident at any size. I take a non-diet approach to health and wellness. And how I came to this work always takes me by a little bit of a surprise. I started my diet history when I was 12 years old, and I would have to say for 40 years, I was a professional dieter. I probably knew how to do it better than anyone that I knew. And when I chose to leave my past profession, which was catering, I spent a lot of time thinking about what am I going to do next? And because I was the professional dieter, and I spent a lot of time reading nutrition information, I spent a lot of time working out, I thought I knew so much it would be a natural progression and that I would help women just like me learn how to lose weight. What I discovered was that through my education, I discovered that I had my own disordered eating challenges and that I was now part of the diet culture and part of what I started to view as a problem. Because what happened was that after I received my certification, I started working with clients, I was still weighing myself every day. And with that came the daily stress of it's a good day, bad day. If I eat this, I eat that. And as I was working with my clients, I noticed that I was feeling that same stress and tension in my body on the days that I was asking my clients to share their progress. And I kept thinking that this is not productive. My goal is to listen and to help support, not damage and demonize. And I started to shift away from, you know what, we're not going to do share your progress. We're not going to do the weighing and the measuring of our bodies. We're going to start to shift and focus on other ways to measure success, because there were so many wins that were within this journey that didn't show up on that number on the scale. What is your energy? How are you sleeping? What's happening with your relationships? What are, other ways to measure success other than that ridiculous number on the scale? And through this process, I continued my education and started to find books. And the one that really changed my life was called Health at Every Size by Linda Bacon. And I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody to start there. And what the premise of her work was that you can be healthy at any size. And it started to take away that thought that has been ingrained in me, as well as so many other people, that a thin body is the only way to have a healthy body. And through there, I ended up going down a rabbit hole that I have never come back into, that I continue to go down deeper and deeper. And that is where I discovered the practice of intuitive eating and the Be Body Positive, both or all non-diet approach to health and wellness. And this is how I now work with my clients and where my Body, Peace, and Food Freedom program have come from, and where today's topic of letting go of the good food versus bad food mentality was devised. This example, I'd love to share with you how I work with one of my clients and what she has experienced. She's in her early 70s. She has been dieting since she is a child, has struggled with binge eating for many years. And when I first started working with her, it was the traditional diet approach. And it was towards the end of that way I practiced. And we have morphed really into full-blown intuitive eating and body neutrality. And she struggles with the good food versus bad food mentality to an extreme, where there is the good food versus bad food, as well as the list of foods that she would never even consider eating. That she is proud of the fact that she says, I'm not going to eat these things. And what has happened is that just reinforces the binging behavior. And through intuitive eating, we practice something called making peace with food and the practice of habituation. The food that we decided to work on together was her love-hate relationship with mozzarella cheese, the kind that you buy in a package, where it's on the bad list and she would still choose to eat it. And she would say, okay, I'm going to open the bag and I'm only going to have X number of ounces and it's going to last this long. And she would constantly have that pull. And no matter what she did, the bag would be gone. She'd go out to the store, she'd buy more, and she would end up in a heap of guilt and shame. Through the practice of making peace with food and habituation, you get unconditional permission to eat that food as much as you want, whether it's on your, if it's, especially when we're talking about a food that has been on that bad food list. And I told her, not necessarily told her, but we talked about going out and buying packages of mozzarella cheese, enough for today, tomorrow, next week. And if you run out, the permission to buy more. She thought I had lost my freaking mind, that like, how am I ever going to control myself? It's never going to work. And she kind of took a deep breath and she said, okay, we've gotten this far. I'm going to trust the process. It can't be any worse than what I've already experienced. And I just received an email from her a few weeks ago. And she said, surprise, I have found I'm less likely to eat a lot of it. With so much cheese in the house, the pull to binge has diminished significantly. I still may eat a little bit more than I expect, but that desire to binge is continuing to distinguish and lessen every day. And she laughs and she calls it her cheese paradox, because she never thought that she would be able to have a food in her house and say, you know what, there's so much there. I really don't need to eat that much right now. I'm okay. So that's just an example of one of the topics or experiences that we dig into and unpack in the Body, Peace, and Food Freedom program. So I mentioned a couple of words called intuitive eating and diet culture. So I want to take a minute to share with you what those words mean, so that in relationship to the good food versus bad food mentality. And again, please feel free to, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. I'll try to, recognize those. And, anything that resonates with you, some sort of reaction, I would greatly appreciate. So a little background about the practice of intuitive eating. It integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. It is the antithesis to diet culture. Diet culture tells you what and when to eat, how much to eat, whether it's a good food or a bad food. It is a belief system that revolves around the idea that thin bodies are the most desirable bodies, and that only thin bodies are healthy bodies. And again, I grew up thinking that, and going into health and wellness coaching, I believed that. And it's only through the practice of intuitive eating where I have shifted my mindset and my practice, where intuitive eating is a personal process where you honor your health by paying attention to your body's messages and meeting your physical and emotional needs. We shift our thoughts from judgment to curiosity. It is based on 10 principles which are focused on body attunement, which is learning how to hear and respond to the physical and the biological sensations that we feel in our body. Those are typical hunger cues and fullness cues. And those are not to be, we've all heard, well, it's the hunger fullness diet. We don't want to minimalize that. And those are words, again, that have been hijacked by diet culture to fit into whatever it is that they are promoting and selling. The practice of intuitive eating is going to explore your beliefs, your rules, your thoughts on what a healthy body, quote unquote, should look like. The understanding the frequent labeling of the good food and the bad food, and how to learn how to offer yourself self-compassion, because that is something that's really missing in so much of how we get through our days. One of the, I would say, probably the most often question asked me is, will I lose weight? And the answer is simply, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to gain weight, lose weight, or stay the same. I have no idea if you are talking to me coming from restriction and deprivation, what your long-term diet history is, what is your genetics, what is your physical health, what is your mental health, what is your emotional health. All of those things come into the practice of intuitive eating. And as long as weight loss is on the table, it inhibits your ability to practice intuitive eating. Focusing on your health and healthy behaviors will create a more positive relationship with your mind, your body, and your food, and allow you to practice daily self-care and body appreciation. Dieting is actually the gateway to disordered eating. And I had mentioned the word disordered eating earlier. And that is something that I discovered about myself when I was going through all of my education. And signs of disordered eating are very similar to dieting practices. So those are feeling out of control with food, spending a lot of time thinking about food, the guilt and shame around the food choices, out of control food if you are around food if you're dieting, all the rules, the good food versus bad food dichotomy, which raises a red flag. I shouldn't eat this. It's healthy versus unhealthy. Clean is the big new word in the last couple of years. So if you're not eating clean, does that mean that you're eating dirty? Did you take that food and put it in dirt and now it's this unedible thing? Trying to understand that those food rules and that type of thinking is part of disordered thinking. And we have, through our practice of dieting, we have normalized the practice of disordered eating. And just because disordered eating is normalized in our culture, it's still problematic. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean that it's healthy. There's a 2008 study found that 3 out of 4 women in the United States have some form of disordered eating patterns. There was a 2016 study put out by the CDC that said that over 50% of the US population has tried to lose weight in the past year. Another study showed that 35% of occasional dieters progress to disordered eating, and 25% of dieting progresses to eating disorders. What fuels dieting, disordered eating, and binge eating disorders comes down to body dissatisfaction and diet culture. And what happens is that you fall into a dieting cycle. And it starts with saying, you look in the mirror and you think like, ugh, I look X. Or you all of a sudden have a health concern, or you're going to the doctor, you've gotten some bad news. Some form of health has entered into your thought process. So what happens is that you start to pursue weight loss as a remedy. And you go into the depriving and the restriction. And then as with normal dieting cycles, all of a sudden the dam breaks and you go into the refeed or a binge. And then along comes the guilt and the shame. And that cycle continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. So now with that background, we're going to dive into what you're going to take away from today's workshop. And you're going to be learning about why labeling foods good versus bad makes them more desirable, why food has no moral value, how and why there's an alternative to the good food versus bad food mentality. As I go through sharing this information, think about what your story is with good food versus bad food. How often you look at food and automatically have that thought, oh, I can eat this, I can't eat that. Take some time and start to put yourself into this conversation. And as you do this, come from the lens of curiosity, not judgment. We want to stay away from that. This is a learning practice. I'm curious if anyone would be willing to share a food that they consider good food or bad food, and why it's on that good food or versus bad food list, if anybody would like to have a thought. Okay, So I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Oh, Elda, you're going to take the risk.
Well, the first one that comes to mind is, for me, is sugar, because, it's been likened to like cocaine because it's so bad for our body. So it's that like, oh, but it tastes so good, whatever it is, And then, yeah, so I don't know. That's the first one that comes to my mind.
And that's a common one. And what happens is that the more you restrict it, the more you want it. And if sugar was truly addictive, we would all be sugar addicts. So it's trying to dismantle and shift our relationship with these foods to get them off of the good food versus bad food mentality, so that we can have a peaceful relationship with those foods that are on our bad food list. Here's an example that when you go to Mexico, people will say, don't drink the tap water. Montezuma's revenge, you're going to get gastrointestinal problems. So the question is, you go out for dinner, and now you have a choice between a can of soda or tap water. All of a sudden, water, which in our country is considered like the holy grail, the best thing to drink, is now going to cause you to be in gastric distress. So all of a sudden, this good food is now a bad food. So it's trying to understand that it's not black and white, that it's not all or nothing. Research suggests that when dieters have cravings, the cravings are more frequent, stronger, more difficult to resist, and slower to disappear compared to those who don't restrict or eat desired foods more frequently. So going back to that sugar example, there's plenty of people who have never restricted sugar, and they could take it or leave it. So it's understanding, where did those thoughts come from? How do you unpack where it started from to remove it off of that good food versus bad food list? So an example is in Spain, chocolate is part of their everyday diet. And they report that there are fewer cravings for chocolate because it's normalized there. In another study, 70% of instances, dieters eventually caved and ate the foods that they were craving. Unfortunately, with that cave came heaps of guilt and less enjoyment for the food. And what happens is something that I refer to as the Seesaw Syndrome. And I'm just going to share my screen real quickly so that you can see what I am talking about. So in the Seesaw Syndrome principle is that when you deprive yourself of food, your guilt goes down. As your guilt goes down, your resistance to resisting the food, you have a harder time to resist the food, and eventually you start to refeed, and the deprivation starts to go up, and you're kind of in that tug of war. And then all of a sudden the balance and the dam breaks, and your deprivation goes down and your guilt increases. So that is an example of what happens with our relationship to foods when we label them good and bad and restrict them. So in cultures where certain foods are normal, they're not craved the way that they are in the diet world that we all live in. And it's learning to understand that you don't need approval from me or any other nutrition or professional to eat food or an ingredient. Diet culture has demonized certain foods and elevates others. And it's done through interpretations and studies. So it's often said, like in some studies, in large amounts. So what happens is that in most nutrition research is done by asking groups of people about their eating habits and about their health conditions that they have now, and any new ones that have developed during the follow-up periods. The results of these studies are associations. It's not black or white, associations. They can't tell you anything about whether any food caused or prevented a disease. So we hear snippets of sound bites in the news or in the newspaper of all of a sudden we hear this food is going to cause this. The more we label those foods good or bad, the bad foods become more desirable. We have a preoccupation with what we can't have. We begin to fear it. You can't fully enjoy it when you're eating because you're so consumed with guilt. It's no longer a natural food choice. There's a value put on that food. The food is bad, so therefore I am bad. We start to embody that thought process. And when when the dam breaks and we start to eat the other foods that we have restricted, all of a sudden there's no self-control. And it is kind of like the screw it mentality versus the mindfully eating mentality, because we're so hyper-focused on eating the foods that we have previously restricted. Certain emotional states can drive our cravings as well, because they are linked to our brain, where pleasure and memory, suggesting that our desire to eat certain foods are related to our past experiences with these foods. And we want that pleasurable experience. We want to be in our parasympathetic mode, where we are resting and digesting and relaxing. And what happens is that when we are dieting, we are always in that chronic state of heightened awareness, fight or flight. So we want to do anything that we can to relieve that state in our body. And often, to begin with, our bodies are hardwired to eat, and we get a natural dopamine release whenever we eat. That is how we survive. Starving bodies are dieting bodies. So our body goes into rebellion, trying to refeed, and we get that dopamine release so that we can eat more. Often when we are depressed, people will crave carbs. And one of the reasons is that will release the neurotransmitter serotonin, which will help with the antidepressant effects. It'll lift your mood. It'll be a mood stabilizer. It'll help improve your sleep. When you're feeling down, we often crave chocolate. It contains the alkaloids that will also raise your serotonin levels. When you're feeling stressed, we'll crave salty foods, which may be associated with reducing the stress hormone cortisol. So we need to learn how to listen, trust, and respect our bodies, as well as shift the language between the good food versus bad food, using language such as something is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, so that we start to not become that good food, I'm a good person, bad food, I'm a bad person. So our language is really important when we start to talk about our food. Often in nutrition science, what is labeled a good food one day turns into a bad food another day, or vice versa. Because I can't see everybody, I'm going to date myself. So I am 55, and I grew up with the slogan, the incredible edible egg. And everybody was eating eggs. Fast forward, all of a sudden, the egg was this horrible thing that the yolk had too many calories and it had cholesterol. Fast forward again, we have learned that just because a food has cholesterol, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to raise the cholesterol in our bodies. So food science is constantly changing. And the next topic that I'm going to move into is one that really resonates with me strongly. And food has no moral value. And when we talk about good food versus bad food, it often leads to moralistic or righteous eating. And if anybody knew me before I learned about the practice of intuitive eating, and all bodies deserve to be fed, and all bodies deserve to be nourished, and all bodies deserve to be respected, I was the queen of righteousness. This is how you diet. These are the foods that you should eat. Oh my God, how could you be eating that? I was known as the person who had the best willpower. My mother still reminds me of my willpower. And with that righteousness, it improved it helped my self-worth. It made me feel more valued, and it became part of my value system. And I had to really work hard to unpack that good food versus bad food dichotomy, because it's not healthy thinking. And that my self-worth and value is so much more than the vessel that I have landed in. Our vessels that we live in, these are our forever homes. How do we make peace with being in these bodies? Because as long as we are breathing, there is more right with what we are doing with our bodies than wrong with our bodies. So, when we're talking about righteousness and the good food versus bad food, going back to that clean eating example, if you're not eating clean, are you eating dirty? Is there such a thing? And it's really a form, when we talk about clean eating, it is a form of body shaming and food shaming. And I had no idea that that's where it was coming from, or that I had unintentionally that was how I focused. And being on an even playing field with foods and understanding that there is no good food, bad food, has created so much more space and forgiveness and self-compassion within myself and those around me, and especially those of who I support. The other philosophy that we all hear is that we only should be eating food close to its original source. It's not always possible. There's so many other things that are going on, and diet culture has hijacked that concept to say, this is, you need to eat this, you can't eat that. And they breed off of our fear and our anxiety over not eating the right food. And with all this restriction comes binging and self-judgment around our food choices. I'm guessing that most of you have heard that what we eat and how much we move is 80% of our whole body health. The reality is, and the information that I have been seeing and reading, is that only 15 to 25% of what we eat and how we move makes up our whole body health. What is our physical health? What is our mental health, our emotional health? What is our financial health, our food security or insecurity? Are you living in a town or a city or in nature? Are you living around pollution? What is the stress and tension level at work, in your house? Those are all the other components that make up our whole body health, that also have a factor into how and why we choose food. What are you sacrificing with the good food versus bad food mentality? When I work with my clients, we do an assessment on how has dieting impacted your life. And it's amazing with all that labeling, we will choose to attend certain, go out to eat or not go out to eat, or go to somebody else's house for dinner. I remember that people were always afraid not only to have me over to their house to cook, because not only was I a caterer, but I had all these food rules and ideas of what was to be served or to be eaten. And I realized, wow, I'm missing out on so much. And I needed to make it okay to say, you know what? I'm happy to be invited, because that is, I'm missing the social aspect. I don't always want to be in charge. And I started to shift on saying that it's not a treat to go and eat these things, that this is part of everyday food, and that we all need to be able to enjoy and experience. And that brings me to an example of pizza. The first thing people say is, oh, it's bad, it's high in fat, it's high in salt, it's got this, it has that. Let's shift how we're going to enjoy that pizza. Let's say it's a Friday or a Saturday night and you have family night, whether you have your kids or your social friends or your parents, whoever's in your social circle is now gathered around your kitchen table or your dining room table, and things that we have been missing so much with that freedom in the last 18 months. And everybody's in your home and in your space, and you're talking and you're catching up, and there's that warm, nurturing feeling in your soul that you are connecting over this pizza. Is this pizza now really this bad, awful thing? No, it's part of your experience. And when it's not been deprived, you can have pizza. It's not going to be that I have to eat the whole thing because I haven't seen it in a year. So it's trying to take the mystique and that pull over those foods that you are challenged with. So what is the difference between a good food or a bad food? Nothing. All food, no matter its category, provides some sort of nutrition or sustenance to our bodies. Food is fuel. There is some nutrition in all foods. We aren't meant to eat the same foods at every meal. Too much of any quote unquote good food can be detrimental to our health. Going back to the water example, if we've watched marathons and people will run in extreme heat and then they will overhydrate with water. And it's been known that people have died from drowning in their water. This magical, wonderful food is all of a sudden detrimental. How are we using this food? What is our relationship to what we are needing and what we are doing? Where is your information about good food versus bad food coming from? And it could be the TV, it could be books, your healthcare professionals that are tied into that diet mentality. You can easily go to a doctor's office and they're going to say, eat this, eat that. They are not educated. Their nutritional education is so small in comparison to their vast knowledge of what they know about their specialty. What is the internet and social media? You can go onto the internet and see something is good or bad in 30 seconds, and you can find that same food on the good, bad, never eat list, always eat list in a split second. Have a discerning eye when you are looking at that information. When you're reading information, where is that information coming from? Who is promoting it as a good food versus a bad food? Often nutrition recommendations are heavily influenced by the financial interest of the food industry. Messaging leads to restriction and deprivation, which is the pathway to the disordered eating. You aren't a good person for eating more nutritious food. You aren't a bad person for eating something less nutritious. The most powerful tool that you can have is listening to your body and paying attention to satisfaction and to satiety. So what is the alternative to the good food versus bad food mentality? First and foremost is the need for self-compassion. Eating is not cheating. There's no room for guilt with food choices. So what you can do is know that your awareness is where your power is. Where did your foods on your good food versus bad list come from? Anybody willing to share what that looks like? You know, where did that list, that mental list that you keep going, start from? You can type it in the chat. You can share if anybody's willing. Elda.
For me, it's I read a lot of books. So it's like there's so much information. It's interesting how you brought up at one time, like you gave the eggs as an example, you know, at one time everybody says it's the thing to do and then, or not yet to do, and then it's not to do, and then it's to do again. Kind of like with the fat thing. I remember years ago, they said, you know, fat is bad for you and everything was fat free. And then we found out that that was bad because then that it had sugars in it. And yeah, so I think it's, for me anyway, a lot of it's from like books because I love to read.
Right. And you gave a great example, you know, whenever I think about my childhood and fat-free, like fat-free was the license to be able to eat as much as you wanted of something. So Snackwells, we used to eat, you know, Snackwells. And as a former Weight Watcher queen, I don't know if has experienced the olden days of Weight Watchers. It's been a long time since I've looked at their information, but the combination of a high fiber food, it was high fiber, low fat, you could eat much more of that food. So how do you get as many points as you can with the greatest quantity of food with the least amount of calories that was going to have an impact on your body? I mean, it was all calorie math. And I would go in and out of a supermarket and I would see labels versus food. I could look at a food and say, okay, that food has X number of calories, that number of proteins, carbs, fats. If I did this combination, I could do that. I mean, it was insane. And it's when we are stuck in those rules of what we can and can't have, that pull becomes so great to those foods. When we start to make peace with those foods, we change our relationship. Elda.
Well, when you brought up Weight Watchers, it reminded me of I attended January of last year. Oprah had this tour that she was doing because anyway, it was somehow affiliated with Weight Watchers. What I found really interesting is that there was a lady that shared, or they just shared during after one of the breaks, that we had for lunch. We were given this like box lunch, and in the box lunch there was an apple. And this lady said, "I don't eat apples anymore because whatever diet she was on, she wasn't allowed to eat apples." And I don't remember if it was Oprah or who was on stage that made the comment. Isn't it sad when I completely forgot this story. It's a good food, bad food mentality. Isn't it sad when it's an apple and this person has been taught that they can't eat that anymore? And I was blown away because I didn't know that there are diets out there that say, you absolutely cannot have an apple, So that was interesting when you brought that up. Yeah. So it's not just foods. I guess it's other people too would,
Right.
it has a strong hold on us because then we have it in our minds and it's just like, they have such a strong hold. We're like, no, that's bad. So that was interesting.
Yeah. And then you become bad. Oh, I ate this. I was so bad today. That language is so harmful to our mental health. And when we remove the good food, bad food mentality, we start to take back our power and embody much more self-compassion and kindness to ourselves. Jody shared she wasn't allowed to eat certain fruits on diets. And that goes back to, well, eat as clean as you can, as close to the natural resources as you can. It's okay to eat this processed food in this frozen package because it has X number of calories, proteins, and carbs, but you're not allowed to eat a piece of fruit. It's time to shift that language and understand where the sources are coming from. So noticing your language around these foods will help your ability to change your thoughts. So a couple of options that I like to share with my clients is a thought ladder, and it has to be believable. So if you have a ladder and you have a thought here, which is a negative thought, we want to work our way up to different thought levels. So you could start with this food is horrible, and if I eat it, I'm going to die, which is extreme, but that happens. The next rung might be, this food will make me sick. This food doesn't make me sick. This food is okay. I can eat this food. So it's learning step by step on how to let some of that thought process go. Another practice is the power of three positive options for each negative thought that you have. I am bad because I ate this food. 2, I am allowed to eat food. I deserve to eat food. My body deserves to be nourished. My biggest philosophy always is about progress, not perfection. Learning how to shift from judgment to curiosity, listening to your body. What do I need? What am I feeling? Really tuning in and trying to get out of that bad food, good food thought process dichotomy. Self-compassion. How are you talking to yourself? We all hear it, self-compassion has been a huge topic over the last 18 months, especially with the pandemic. And it comes down to the basic question, the words that you talk to yourself. Would you ever utter those words out loud to somebody you loved or cared about? Or would you even say those words to a complete stranger? Because our self-chatter our internal self-chatter sometimes is so strong and painful that you wouldn't even think of uttering those words out loud. Some other thoughts are when you notice the guilt that comes with those bad, when you label that food, good food, bad food, guilt robs you of the pleasure. So when you get out of that guilt, you can enjoy that food. It's not being brought down to this, this magical thing that you can, the guilty pleasure. We want to remove that thought process. Guilt robs you of your pleasure. The slightest deviation makes you feel bad and that you are bad. It's unproductive. Food is just fuel. And when we have a really nice, loving relationship with it, it is part of a loving relationship between ourselves. Variation and moderation are essential keys to nourishing the body well. Focusing the value on one food limits all of it, doesn't define everything about our food choices, so that we don't want to talk about our diet in the terms of one food. We want to look at it as an expanded plethora of choices, because eating one ring ding or donut or a dozen ring dings or donuts, it's not going to destroy your overall health. It just doesn't work that way. And your mental and your relationship health has so much more impact in addition to the foods that you are fueling with. So any questions so far? I feel like I've given you a ton of information, and it's hard without seeing faces on what people are thinking. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those into the chat. Well, I will give you another opportunity. So at this time, I'd like to, first of all, thank you for coming to this workshop. And it's really the springboard into my Body Peace and Food Freedom program. And that is a 6-month program where it is one-on-one coaching with a small group experience. The program is interactive, engaging, and we work through learning how to embody the practice of intuitive and mindful eating, and working through body positivity and neutrality. You'll understand how you can enjoy foods without the guilt and the shame, create consistency in your everyday eating, distinguish the difference between emotional and physical hunger. Again, focusing on removing all of the diet rules, getting rid of that good food, bad food dichotomy thinking. Adopting a weight-neutral approach to health through the practice of health at every size. Give you tools to be able to walk into a doctor's office and feel confident and say, I don't have to be weighed. If you struggle with your weight, when a doctor says, you go in for knee pain, and the first thing that they tell you to do is to lose weight. I am helped you to become empowered so that you can say, if I was a smaller size or a different size, how would you treat me? Would you send me for an X-ray? Would you send me for an MRI? You would dig a little bit deeper. How do you show up so that your body can be equally respected as a thin body or somebody with thin privilege? You're going to learn to be able to accept your here and now body. Understand that weight does not determine good health, stopping that all or nothing thinking, and eliminating and reducing your emotional eating. It's really learning how to listen, trust, and respect your body so that you can be happy, healthy, and confident at any size. I'd like to share with you a recent review that I had from one of my clients. And she shares that, let me just pull that up so I can see it. Lisa's expertise and gentle guidance has helped me to reconnect and listen to my body again. I feel more confident in my food choices and trust my body to tell me what it needs when. Plus, I now know how to approach situations where I'd normally be judgmental of myself with kindness and compassion. Lisa is truly a life changer. I would welcome any questions, thoughts. My Body Peace and Food Freedom program is will open this afternoon. The program kicks off September 14th. It is a 6-month program. There is a few weeks that there is a break because I did plan a vacation. So I just always want to put that out there, but everything is just expanded on a time frame. The book that I shared was called Health at Every Size, and the author is Linda Bacon. They, I should say, now goes by the name Lindo Bacon. So if you Google it, it might come up under one of those names. It is the same person. Any other questions that I can answer for you? If you do have personal questions, please feel free to reach out. I would love to have the opportunity to spend a half an hour with you to see if the program is the right fit for you. It does take time. It does take commitment. Each lesson you walk away with information that you can use. There's supporting documents and PDFs and journal entries to help you explore what's important to you. And if with that, I think we are done. Oh, please come back to the other two workshops. The next one is going to be on Monday, August 30th at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the topic is going to be how to discover your food freedom. And the third part of this mini series is going to be what I refer to as book club. And we're going to be talking about The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, and talk about radical reflections. So I'm super excited about that conversation. And thank you so much for coming and being a part of this workshop. I am grateful to have be able to share my expertise and experience, and would welcome the opportunity to support you through your intuitive eating and mindfulness journey. And any questions? So I'm going to stop recording.